Welcome to Bleach Revisited. I am Karakura Gold, your host of this series in which we will be reading every single chapter of the Bleach manga, providing critical analysis of the art and narrative, as well as personal response to the chapter itself. We'll also be discussing how that individual chapter connects to the rest of the manga as a whole. As usual, we begin these videos with a reading of the chapter that we are currently discussing for the episode. This is Chapter 127, Beginning of the Death of Tomorrow. Ichigo, get up. Come on, hurry. There's no time to lose. It's all right if he won't get up on his own. I'll drag him to his feet. Zangetsu! Bleach. Chapter 127. Beginning of the Death of Tomorrow. "28 minutes earlier. 3 days of Bankai. Day 1. What's that goofy looking doll? 11:33 a.m. It's a Ten Shintai, a divine transfer body. It's a vital spiritual tool of the secret police. It can forcefully transfer and externalize the soul of a Zanpakuto. I don't get it. We need that to practice Bankai? Of course. The essence of Shikai is to communicate and synchronize with your Zanpakuto, but Bankai requires externalizing and forcing it into submission. That means, instead of you entering the world of the Zanpakuto to communicate with it, you summon the Zanpakuto into our world. It usually takes more than 10 years of training to perform the move. But you were able to fight Kenpachi Zaraki to a draw. I think you're ready to externalize Zangetsu." "Oh. You know what I'm talking about. Piercing this with Zangetsu will force it to happen. I'll use my powers to keep him in that state. But this can only be done once, and it lasts only for 3 days. Somehow, you must force Zangetsu to submit in that time. If you can do that, I won't ask what happens if I fail. If that's the only way, then I'll just have to do it." "You appear to have recovered, Ichigo." "Zangetsu, you heard, didn't you?" "Yes. I'll let you choose the method of battle. Can you start right away?" "Yes." What the heck?" "Only one of them is the real me. I can only be defeated by that sword. If you want me to submit, find it before I kill you, and then..." "Cut me down!" "Come on, Zabimaru!" Oh no. I drew my sword against Hinamori. What have I done? I'm so terrible. How could I? I'm the absolute worst. Who? Who is it? Whoa, this is ugly. I can't even look. Cap. Captain Ichimaru. You look tired. Poor thing. Would you like my help? Come with me, Izuru. I guess these kids love soccer. They fell in love with my powerful kick. Maybe nobody remembers this, but I've got incredible leg strength and wanted me on their team. Come on, aren't you Karen's brother? We're gonna lose our vacant lot to some guys from Mitsubiya. There's a 5-on-5 soccer game tomorrow, and the losers are gonna die. Get lost! I don't have time to play with kids. But then one of them said something that really got to me. And that is it for chapter 127. I think, is it 127 or is it 128? Oh boy, I'm pretty sure it's 127. I'm not gonna go back. I'm not gonna check it. All one take. I'm calling it 127. Death of Tomorrow. Pretty sure, or the beginning of the Death of Tomorrow. It's the beginning of the Death of Tomorrow, isn't it? Yeah, 127. Beginning of the Death of Tomorrow. So good at this game where I don't forget something I read 5 minutes ago. A plus. Uh, anyway, enough patting myself on the back. Let's actually talk about Bleach, yeah? So here we got, where we kind of left off. Yurichi berating Ichigo for being bloodied on the ground, sort of in this vast training area that they're in, that she has brought him to. And, there's the idea, right? That you have no time to lose, and we get this familiar boot, if you're not already familiar with it. That is clearly Zangetsu's boot. Now, as far as the title, The Beginning of the Death of Tomorrow, bit of a title there, isn't it? The idea, I think, is the beginning of this guy, Ichigo's Bankai training. I think whenever we're in this chapter, we can certainly read it that way, right? That, you know, this is the start of it. This is the start of a kind of new era. The death of tomorrow is questionable, though. Like, so perhaps there's something foreboding to happen. And certainly this chapter does have quite a bit of foreboding. Ichigo's trying to grasp new power at, of course, high risk. When isn't he trying to get power at a high risk? Literally, the first time that he got power, he had to stab himself through the heart. And if he messed it up, there were 1,000 different ways that could go wrong. And even though they did it right, it still was an executable offense. Yeah, Ichigo's always power comes at a risk. And I think there's an interesting kind of intersection of power and risk throughout all of Bleach. That there's always sort of we've talked about the fragility of power, but I think just like the risk of power. That power is this fleeting, sort of ephemeral thing that you can't really hold forever. And constantly we're seeing that people with positions of power, people that hold power, are constantly having that challenge, and it's not as stable a thing as you might think it is, right? There will always be someone stronger, that whole bit. So yeah, this idea, the beginning of the death of tomorrow, it really puts us at the precipice of something ominous. And this chapter I think sets the stage for that. I do like Yurichi's sort of expression here that she's not giving Ichigo so much of a hard time as she's like, look, you need to get up, come on. Like there's an urgency there for her. She's not just kind of razzing him. But yes, this is very clearly Zangetsu's boot, and of course we get to see Zangetsu. It's got this nice little design element here. These chains almost. This kind of band that goes from shoulder abreast twice, and we get to see that reflected on the tension tie when we see it a little bit later. Technically earlier. Anyway, it's in flashback. Yeah, I love Zangetsu. I'll drag him to his feet, holding a very different Zangetsu than what we've come to expect, right? And Ichigo, turning his head and looking. I do like the design here for this chapter cover, right? All the various different like household items afloat as Orihime sleeps on a bed. We haven't seen Orihime, but it is a nice like little look. I like the little sweater, long sort of pants skirt looking setup she's got going on. I really like the way that this looks kind of like a fold out of like a notebook or something. Um, like the shadow of the couch and the way that the stylized beginning of the death of tomorrow. Bleach written out with little lines there. It's cute. Usually we don't see Bleach lowercase. Bleach is typically stylized as all capitals Bleach. That's how I always write Bleach. Whenever I write Bleach, I believe that is the intended mode of writing the title of the series is Bleach in all caps. Whenever you write Bleach without caps, that's the cleaning product, as you well know. Um, but yes, cool chapter cover. Uh, Orihime's involvement in all of this, we have yet to see. Right now, we know that, what is it, Maki Maki? Whatever, Aramaki, whatever the guy's name is, the 11th Division guy, he's carrying her off. But we'll see how Orihime factors into the death of tomorrow and how she becomes involved. We get this flashback to 28 minutes earlier. Sets us back in flashback. And here you can see the same sort of rope that is on whole boy, old man Zangetsu is here on this tension tie that Yorichi has. Now, in the Bleach Brave Souls games, the Tenshintai is an accessory that allows your soul bomb, your ultimate technique to do more damage, which I think is kind of fitting here, because this is certainly a thing that helps you unlock your Bankai or your ultimate sort of technique. So perhaps the Tenshintai is something that does that. She also, if you see in her other hand, she has like a little bit of like a rope there, or some sort of talisman or something going on in her hand there. And I do believe that the idea is that this rope that is on the Tenshintai and then later on Old Man Zangetsu has to do with binding that Zanpakuto spirit in reality. But we'll talk about that a little bit more as we move forward. I do like its design. I think it's kind of interesting, the idea that you can kind of materialize out of this kind of like white doll you could make into various things. It's very evocative. I do like it quite a bit. Um, yeah, Ichigo, of course. I love Ichigo right here. This pose that he has is fantastic, and overall this chapter is going to see like just a lot of great character artwork, a lot of dynamicy from our characters, which I really do appreciate. But this pose from Ichigo is great, like with just his forearm resting against the hilt of Zangetsu as he looks on. um, and time is important, if you do remember, because Rukia's execution is only in a manner of so much time, right? So the idea of like, okay, well, we got to get Bankai within this much time so that we can save Rukia before she's killed, right? So time becomes a very important thing moving forward, and so the death of tomorrow again speaks towards like perhaps the that time being destroyed or taken away. It's ominous, right? The idea that we have a tomorrow is always a sort of promise to us. But if we have no more tomorrows, if our tomorrows are eliminated, if we have no further future with somebody or are on the further path that we're traveling, I mean, that's harrowing, right? And so perhaps the events of this chapter hint towards a tomorrow that may never come. Um, of course, she explains the Tenshintai here. It's a divine transfer body. So it's a vital spiritual tool of the secret police. And I do believe that she is here talking about the Amitsukudo, the secret police, I believe, of the Soul Society. Now, I think I had misremembered this before, the Tenshintai. I think I had misremembered it as another one of Urahara's tools. I don't know, because it seems like maybe it's actually a Soul Society tool here. It's just a perhaps one that isn't infrequent use. But I always read it because it is this sort of like, okay, well, you've only got 3 days to forcibly externalize the soul of your Zanpakuto, and then it's this real dangerous thing. And I've always sort of read that as being evocative of the sort of methods that Kisuke uses, right? That there are these very like, well, if you mess up, you're dead, and your soul's fucked, and you turn to become a hollow, but you get your soul reaper powers, that kind of stuff, right? The whole shattered shaft. Um, and we don't know, maybe he developed that sort of uh, training while he was still in Soul Society. So it's very likely that this could be yet another one of Urahara's inventions, even. But I feel like if that was the case, it would have been mentioned. So the fact that like this is actually something that's in use by Soul Society comes as a little bit of a surprise by me because I didn't remember that facet of it. Nevertheless, having a tool that can forcibly transfer and externalize the soul of Zanpakuto seems pretty, pretty extreme, right? This is something that allows you to take the soul that's inside of someone's Zanpakuto and take it out, right? Assumably, that person then wouldn't be able to use their Zanpakuto for that time. Uh, it's curious. Like I'm wondering about the whole ramifications of that, right? Of course, the idea is that he will practice his Bankai that way. Let's get back to it, right? So yeah, Shikai you communicate with and synchronize with your Zanpakuto, right? Your Zanpakuto and you both have Ryatsu, and you synchronize with them and draw your powers from one another, right? But the Bankai is different because you externalize the spirit in your Zanpakuto, and you force its Ryatsu into your own submission. So it's an entirely different technique, and I think that's like one of the big things that often gets lost in Bleach. Is that a lot of people tend to conceive of Shikai and Bankai as like just like a power up or like a step up. Like Bankai is just a stronger version of Shikai, and that's not the case at all. Shikai is a resonance of two souls fighting together, whereas Bankai is an externalization of a soul that's been made manifest, and the then forcing that soul into your own submission, right? So, yeah, instead of communicating with your Zanpakuto in their world, you summon it into our world, and typically it takes about 10 years or more of training to perform or to master. I like how like earlier it was master, but now it's perform. Um, so yeah, there's this idea of materialization of the soul, that souls can be materialized. That within your sword there is that soul, but it exists within this blade, but it can be made manifest outside. And so it's really interesting the way in which the Zanpakuto has its own soul that kind of grows, develops, becomes more powerful, and then eventually it can manifest itself and be an entire entity within our actual world. It reminds me a lot of, and I think maybe it even draws from this, is Japanese mythology. There's a lot of different oni and I'm thinking of just kind of spirits in general, like yokai, right? And there's a whole category of yokai that are just like yokai that are spirits that are of like objects that gain spirits for having existed for so long and being impressed upon by humanity and all of that, like tools and things like that. And especially there's a whole like nefarious kind of set of yokai that are all just like discarded things. Um, there's a pretty fantastic little like clip in a OVA. Whew, this is a big pull. I'm getting kind of distracted here, but I'm thinking of oh boy, this is gonna take me one sec. I have to actually look it up. Um, all right, I had to look it up because I couldn't remember exactly. So in the anime anthology short piece, which has a bunch of different different like smaller sort of anime films that were produced largely by Sunrise and Sochiku. There's also a video game in there, by the way, that was developed by Grasshopper, which is kind of interesting. One of the short films is called, and the one that starts the series is called Possessions, which I think is a really cool play on words between, things that are possessed by a spirit, but also they are something that you own, like a possession, right? Um, and it's a Shuhei Morita production under Sunrise, and it's only like 14 minutes. I'll see if I can't get a link for it in the description. Um, but yeah, the guy that Morita, I think he is known for working on Tokyo Ghoul. He's the director for all of Tokyo Ghoul. Um, and otherwise, I'm not sure what else really he's worked on. Kaku Renbo. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Okay, yeah, this guy's really into like spirits and stuff like that. Um, Nevertheless, Possessions is he wrote the screenplay and he actually directed the animated film for it. It's pretty good, but it really focuses on the kind of relationship between humans and their objects and the spirits that kind of possess those objects in this folkloric tradition. The reason I bring all that up, the reason I make that entire aside, is that I think Kubo's pulling on that mythology here, right? He's kind of there's this notion of like these swords, whenever wielded, will grow to have this spirit within them, and that spirit is both a reflection of its wielder, but also its own entity. Spirit, or even spirits, in the case of Ichigo, right? And so you see like this entity that exists within the weapon, within the tool, within the possession. It is possessed itself, and I like in Bleach that like that sort of haunting, which is interesting because all these characters are ghosts in the first place, and then they wield haunted swords. Like this is the coolest. Again, I love Bleach, man. Like, but the idea that ghosts wielding haunted swords summon like and manifest the spirits within their own blades to do battle. It's cool, right? Like that's pretty cool. But yeah, obviously Bankai is a completely different technique from Shikai. And I think it's really important to remember them as such that like yes, Bankai is generally 10 times stronger, whatever, but you should always think of Bankai as a manifestation of the spirit within someone's sword, and a Shikai simply being the synthesis of both of them working together, right? Um, so like it's the difference between, I guess, if you get in your car and you can drive your car somewhere and you arrive there, that's the Shikai, right? That's that. The Bankai is if you could make your car like drive itself into somebody, I guess. I don't know if that's a great analogy, but anyway, it's cool stuff. I do like also that we do, even though these are all parts of the manga that we've already seen, I do like that we at least, with this kind of exposition dump, because I gave it a pretty hard time just a few chapters ago with the oof, is it Sanrei? Oh boy, I can't remember the words. Ha ha. Karker Gold forgets more things. Not really a great strategy whenever you're talking about this series as a whole. Oh boy. Um, with Uryu's glove, I'm pretty sure it's the Sanrei glove, the Sanrei Shuto. Um, with that glove, basically, the idea was like I really didn't like that page where there was just a bunch of dialogue. This is yet another page. It's just a bunch of dialogue explaining how Tenshintai works, how the Shikai and Bankai are different, and how how all this functions. So it's just again kind of expositional information that's just being given to both, like, to us, the reader. Now, I do like that here it's rooted a little bit more like with the glove. It had to be like this kind of finagling of like, okay, so Soken told Ishida this in a flashback, and that's how we're getting it now. I like that this is dialogue that's happening between two characters, like in the moment. So like that already kind of makes it a little bit better for me. But I also like that we actually get some art to illustrate what they're discussing. Um, while it's even art that we've seen, at least it does a good job of helping us understand, all of that. Now, the interesting thing is, like, again, Bankai requires externalizing and forcing the submission, your Zenpakuto spirit, right? And so what's shown here is Renji and Zabimaru. So it leads us to wonder, is Zabimaru externalizing his spirit there? Or, is he able to externalize his spirit but not force him to submission? So we have to wonder if Renji has been Bankai or is on the cusp of Bankai. Nevertheless, because of his battle with Kenpachi Zaraki, Yorichi decides that she's going to give Ichigo this try. And I do like this panel right here where the shadow on Ichigo is used to reflect this memory of Ichigo and Zangetsu, especially with Zangetsu being this kind of entity that is perhaps tied to shadow or darkness. You get that in a lot of his imagery, right? Like the creeping shadow of his cloak. And so I love the way that this is used. This is a fantastic, this panel here of Ichigo having that kind of realization, really cool stuff. I just love the stylization of that. And that's the sort of thing that I feel like you lose with the animated material, is you don't get as much of this sort of stylized work that Kubo's doing in these moments. And whether or not that's valuable to you overseeing something animated, that's an entire thing on your end. But yeah, I love there's more and more as we go on throughout the series. Kubo becomes more confident with his artwork and continues to kind of experiment with these different stylizations. And yeah, they're really cool, and I love it, and I'm here for it. We get some pretty good Yorichi expressions here. The idea that you'll pierce this with Zangetsu. She'll use her powers to keep him in that state. Only will last for 3 days. You'll have to figure out how to make him submit. And I like that Ichigo is just like, okay, let's go. And it shatters his blade, completely eradicates it as, of course, Zangetsu appears, right? Old man Zangetsu's here, and he's taken form. And so, it's kind of interesting. I like that he's like, oh, well, you've appeared to have recovered. And that old man Zangetsu is allowed to kind of choose the way the battle goes. Has this huge 2-page spread where he summons all of these swords. We'll go into double page mode here so that we can get a look at that. And I do love all the different variants of Zangetsu, right? There's just erupts from the ground 1,000 different Zangetsus, right? And we get this thing okay, well, only one of them is real, right? And you can only be defeated by the real sword, the true, Bankai, right? The actual Zangetsu is what you need to defeat Zangetsu. And so if he wants to submit, he needs to find it before being killed. And so Old Man Zangetsu is going to be actively trying to kill Ichigo. But if Ichigo is able to find his true blade, he can strike down the old man. And I think this is a really kind of cool test, right? It's oh, well, are you able to discern my true power? Are you able to actually find the true power here among all of these sort of mirrored fakes? And it's kind of cool because Ichigo has been searching for his power and kind of developing his power, developing this relationship with Zangetsu. And so I like this idea that he needs to now be able to prove his capacity for understanding the true kind of form of this power. It also lets Kubo play with 1,000 different designs for Zangetsu's blade, which is pretty cool. And we'll go back to single page mode. So, boop. Of course, yeah, we get this immediate clash. And I like that they're using both of them different blades. So Ichigo and Zangetsu both pick up different blades and they lock blades, and then we get this, cut back to Renji just kind of walking out of his cage. I guess the idea is they didn't expect him to, break out, because they certainly left him with his Zenpakuto, right? And so he's just like, well, time to walk on out of here, no problem. knocked that guy out. Real shame. We got to Momo, of course, who has read the letter left to her by Aizen, right? The letter which details Aizen's killer. And she has decided, she's made up her mind. She's facing forward with intent. And we jump away again, and here we have Izuru Kira, right? Kira, and he's here, and he's kind of in sort of shame and shock. He's really regretting having drawn his sword against Hinamori, right? Which both of them had to be detained for that, if you do remember. Because Hinamori came to the conclusion that Ichimaru Gin must have been the murderer, right? She drew her weapon against him, and Ichimaru Gin, being, of course, the third seat commander, he seemed like he was ready to kill her, but Izuru actually got in the way, and was like, well, you can't draw your sword against my captain, right? So I do like especially, again, there's a lot of things here. I really do like the construction of this page. Like, compare it to Hinamori's, where we see the roof, we get this close up of Hinamori, and the letter. She pulls it to a breast, slides it into her kimono, and kind of settles up, right? She's very front and center. She's very sure of what she has to do. She's in the center of all these bars, right? Um, and even the page panels can serve as those bars, but she's centered every time. Whenever we get to Kira, his page is constantly in chaos. So we have this panel to the right that shows the exterior bars, but then we get this chair that has been hacked apart, destroyed, knocked over. There's blood droppings on the floor. I assume it's blood. We get Kira, and he's left aligned. He's kind of huddled in a corner. He's regretting himself, and then when we finally turn the next page, we see him in absolute sort of shock, real disdain for himself. He really is, hating what he's done, and I really love the expression work here. Like, we really get the sense of Kira really being, hard on himself, very, very troubled by how quickly things got out of hand, and how whenever push came to shove, he's not comfortable with where his allegiances lie, right? That he doesn't like that he would draw his sword against one of his lifelong friends. Assumably, they train in this academy. They're both seated officers. They must have known each other for a while. It seemed like they got on pretty well, and especially with the way that Kira seems tortured by this, it seems as though they've been friends for a long time. And so, it's the sort of thing where it'd be like, yeah, if you were at work and you and your friend worked together, and then you know, somebody killed your boss and pinned him to the pinned him to the wall, and then your worker accused your manager, and and pulled a knife on him, and you got in the way, and then and both of you were arrested, and then in prison you were like, why did I get in the way of my coworker? Why did I threaten her with a knife? Why was I ready to kill my friend? Bad analogies. Anyway, of course, Kira is visited by resident troublemaker and vaguely evil character Ichimaru again, who, as usual, whenever he's up to no good, has this massive smile on his face. And he rolls in. Of course, I love that he's given this very prominent sort of moment on page. I like that he kind of floats in, that he has this lightness to him. And he doesn't seem bothered. He doesn't seem weighed down in the same way that Kira does. I love the juxtaposition between how Kira is really huddled and heavy and weighty, and Gin enters the frame. And he doesn't even have anything above him. It's all white. I love that we get the floorboards, but he's almost like this divine or angelic sort of figure, kind of just floating in. And we know that we get the sense of this real foreboding evil, right? Gin is someone that we're meant to be suspicious of, and so the fact that he shows up and he just offers his help, right? He just kind of is going to do, just an absolutely fine little jailbreak with Kira here, just break him out. And the absolute shock on Kira's face is his boss is telling him hey, you were detained. Fuck that. Break the rules. Come with me. And directly, addresses him as Izuru, right, by his name. Um, and yeah, like just like the way that Gin's hands coiled around the cell bar, which we assume I'm pretty sure would. So it's like, again, you could get out of there no problem. But just like the sinister sort of shadowy expression on Gin here, I think works really well. Um, I think Kubo's sort of shading, again, rough here and there, but very effective on a whole. Again, I keep saying again. I think Kubo's starting to really play with the different sort of planes of the face, really, especially with these different shading. You can see around like the nose and the chin and like the cheeks, especially like the different sort of depths of like cross hatching or well, I say cross hatching, it's just like hatch shading, lined shading here, and you can see how it like lightens and darkens in areas, and in other places it's completely highlighted. It's fantastic. I love the sort of like rim lighting that's on Gin here. It really makes him seem absolutely sinister. And like, if Gin wasn't already one of my favorite characters, I love the idea that like he's really taking advantage of his position here, to kind of press gang Izuru into things, because he's seen firsthand that Izuru is willing to raise a weapon against even someone that Izuru cares for, on behalf of Gin. So Gin is like not just taking advantage of their relationship, but also taking advantage of like his position as captain over Izuru. So Izuru really doesn't like Izuru probably wants to go with Gin, doesn't want to be here, kind of wallowing in self like pity and regret. Uh, but yeah, Gen's going to kind of help him flee. It seems. So we'll see what Izuru and Gin are getting up to, but we can assume that it is no good. We finally kind of come to our little Omake extra bit, and we get that they want Kon to, Konpaku, Kon. Anyway, they want Kon to help them in their soccer game because he's got good kick power. And they said something that really got to him, and I think it's the idea that like, well, the losers will die, right? The idea that someone might die because of they're not the way that they should be is something that strikes Cone, right? He doesn't like those sort of injustices, those sort of arbitrary consequences that end someone's life, much like his own, right? He only gets to exist because he's able to exist as this mod soul instead of someone's body. Otherwise, he's kind of trapped in a pill forever, and they would have been fine with his existence just not being anymore. So if it weren't for Ichigo and Co. kind of willing to kind of give him a body, he wouldn't have one. He wouldn't exist. So he has a soft spot for those who feel put in this plight. I just do love the little visual of like all these kids ganging up on like Ichigo. What's Kon in Ichigo's body, and like him like flailing trying to deal with these kids and get them off of him. Yeah, it's good stuff. Anyway, yeah, this chapter's pretty cool. Obviously, like sets up a lot of different things. We have our three different vice captains, all like coming to a kind of anti-societal conclusion, right? It seems as though Renji is breaking out, and he has finally decided, what he's going to do, but it includes breaking out of prison, right? So who's he going to raise his sword against if not Ichigo and the Ryoka? We only really have Soul Society for him to point his blade towards. Whenever it comes to Momo here, it seems as though she's made up her mind to perhaps do something about the killer indicated in Aizen's final letter to her. And so perhaps, and again, we know it's not one of the Ryoka, so she's perhaps going to go and try to get her revenge and exact that, it seems. And then Kira and Gin, we have no idea what they're up to, but given the circumstances, we can only assume that it is, of course, no good. That it's something sinister, something perhaps to deal with this conspiracy. And so this chapter does a lot of really great things. It hooks us in with this whole training with Ichigo, this really cool moment of growing Ichigo's powers again very suddenly. I mean, we were only, you know a few volumes ago in the Undead, we really uh, had this burst of power with Ichigo, this really using his Shikai for the first time, and we got to really see the way that like it even put him on the level of someone like Zaraki Kenpachi. But here, he's going to gain even more power. He's got to become capable of fighting Byakuya Kuchiki if he ever wants to have a hope of saving Rukia, right? So it's like this really cool, like desperate, like okay, well you have to overcome the spirit of your own power. You have to overcome your own power. You have to tame it. You have to make it, respect you, and to do so is not just a violent struggle, but one that is symbolic as well, with him finding the right sword, um, which is again really cool stuff. So we have like this personal movement forward for Ichigo, but then also, yeah, we get these different Soul Society characters that we've kind of been focused on, these smaller narratives earlier on in the arc, and those are finally taking kind of a turn. We're moving, again, this is something that is constantly like there's this idea of a threshold, right? Anytime that you write a narrative, you read a story, there's always going to be, if you think about it in the sense of the hero's journey of Joseph Campbell's kind of steps of any great kind of story or fiction, like, right, the idea is that there's a template that can be applied to most stories that work, right? The whole hero's journey template, and you can sort of see elements of it in any story, but the idea of there being a threshold, right? This kind of boundary that the character has to pass in order to step into another state of being or another world, whatever it might be, right? And so obviously there's like we've got, and there's constant sort of like thresholds, right? There's that initial one, but then there's this kind of in the belly of the beast sort of situation where you're in this world of danger and you have to quickly learn how things work, become a master of this other world, and then you can use those powers that you've mastered to kind of apply them in the world that you once were in. That's the return. Anyway, I can get into story structure nonsense all the time. Point is that we're hitting a point in a lot of these characters' personal narratives where they're finally crossing this threshold, right? Where Renji has been put up against, realizing that, like he has kind of been this tool of the Soul Society, and that if he wants to actually do something rather than continue to suffer and deal with the fact that even the person that he was closest to is going to be executed, he needs to stand up and do something. And so this is him finally kind of moving to do something about that, right? Literally passing the boundary of his cell. And I do like that the threshold is that imprisonment, that cell that they've all been put in, the kind of stricture, the structure of I was saying strictures, those were rules, like societal rules, but the sort of bonds that society puts them in, right? That all of them are detained, and they all struggle back against society one way or another. If it's personal justice, a personal vendetta, or a connection to somebody who perhaps doesn't have, the best for society in mind. In each of our, again, we don't know his motivations yet, but it doesn't seem like he's up to any good. Well, but then you second guess it because it's like, well, this guy's supposed to. He seems like he's supposed to be suspicious. So am I being distracted by Gin being so overtly suspicious? Perhaps there's other characters that are up to no good. So yeah, it's cool stuff. I like the chapter quite a bit. Obviously, there's a lot of really neat ideas. I think it builds Bankai in a really cool way, and I think having this whole ceremony of Ichigo gaining his power through this challenge with Old Man Zangetsu is very cool. It's very evocative. Um, it makes you wonder, like how every other captain that has their Bankai would have done this, right? How all these other characters would have achieved this power. So, I dig it. I dig it. Of course, it also leads us to wonder more things about Yurichi herself, why she doesn't seem to carry a sword, why she seems to know all of this stuff. I mean, we know that she's got these connections to Soul Society, but we don't know how deep they run. Yeah, it's all fantastic. I'm loving it. I'm loving the art. I think this chapter has some really great expressive character moments from almost every character that appears in it. If not just every character that appears in it. Yeah, it's really good for like a transitory chapter, especially one that like doesn't have a singular focus on like an event. Um, yeah, it's great stuff. I'm all about it. Good chapter, good one. Bleach is great. If there's anything else you want to talk about with this chapter, if there's anything you notice, if there's any details you'd like to bring up, please do let me know. Leave a comment, and we can talk about it. As always, I want these episodes to kind of work as a forum for discussion on the episode, on like the chapter itself. So, if there's anything you want to talk about with this chapter, just bring it up. Leave a comment. We can talk about it. I'm always down. I don't want to act like I'm like the final authority on any of this stuff. Like these are just my own observations, my own sort of analysis and critique, and so don't take anything I say as like definitive. The whole point is this is like where I'm at my current age and education and like personal context, what I'm getting out of reading Bleach, as opposed to what I did whenever I was like a kid. You know, like whenever I was reading these chapters, I was in like grade school. I was in like maybe at this point I would have maybe been in like eighth or ninth grade, I think. So yeah, it's pretty young. So obviously this is going to hit me a bit different now. Especially understanding a lot of the like kind of arthurial and folklore context too, I think helps me appreciate a little bit of what's going on in a deeper way too. Like I said, like the idea of ghosts with ghosts that are like sword ghosts, ghosts with swords that have ghosts in them. It's cool stuff. Um, yeah, man, I love Bleach. Anyway, let's talk about spoilers. Let's talk about how this connects to the rest of the series. And oh boy, this is a chapter with some big ones. Big old spoilers. Some big old spoilers in this one, right? First and foremost, we'll talk about it whenever I get to the title card, but the title is the pretty prominent. I do like that Zangetsu with this sort of like chest to shoulder raiment thing immediately makes me think of like an officer in the military. Immediately makes me think of the Sternritter. Immediately makes me think of Yuhapa. So you know that's cool. I know it's just an element of the Tenshintai, but it is cool. The idea of old man Zangetsu kind of dragging Ichigo to his feet, dragging him to all this. But I want to talk about the beginning of the Death of Tomorrow as a title, and where I really think it connects. Because obviously, within the kind of the context of this chapter, yes, it connects to all of these sort of events being put into motion that may bring an end to the timeline as we expect it to be, right? Certainly, Rukia's execution also gets fast forward all of that. Now, um, yeah, so the big thing is like this is the idea of where Ichigo's true Bankai becomes significant, right? Um, that like the sword that he uses here is the one that he will use to defeat Yuhabak. And we'll get into that in a little bit, but the idea of it being like this is the beginning of the death of tomorrow, this is really kind of connecting all the way to Yuhabak's like ultimate sort of like him being the future and him being the death of all of their tomorrows, right? And that old man Zangetsu perhaps in a way represents that threat of the Almighty, of Yuhabak. And certainly if the Almighty is present whatsoever in Old Man Zangetsu, it's rearing itself in this chapter. And so, if this chapter is supposed to be the first really important point of foreshadowing to how they're going to defeat the final villain of Bleach, it being titled as the beginning of the death of tomorrow certainly seems to fit. Another thing that I've seen people bring up regarding this is that the stylization in the two, and I'm dotting the I's, being crosses. Now, obviously, you can say they're meant to kind of resemble Orihime's hairpins, which those are six pointed, right? These are four. These are clearly like either crosses or windmills. So that's the idea, is that maybe that's not, it's less Orihime and it's more the Quincy cross itself. And certainly the way in which this text is stylized is reminiscent of like Quincy related text stylization in a way anyway. It just reminds me of the Quincy. Now, as far as like Orihime herself being here, uh, I do like there's like a lot of stuff that I could extrapolate myself, right? Beginning of the Death of Tomorrow, the chapter title being "In the Shadow" that is cast over, like this kind of regular scene. Again, you Habak in the shadow, the Quincy kind of coming from the shadow, that being like the home of their threat is a whole thing. Orihime being one of the people that is threatened that's close to Ichigo, but also Orihime having a direct hand in altering, like, because she can change the flow of time, right? She can deny events, and her capability to do so plays a strong hand in the defeat of Yuhabak. So her being here might not just represent her being someone who is threatened, especially as she becomes one of the people that is closest to Ichigo as she bears his children, um, or at least his child. Whenever we get to where we are, Kazui, right? But also, she's involved in the death of tomorrow, not just as someone who's threatened by it, but also somebody who brings an end to it. So yeah, this potentially, if you want to read deep into it, is a title that basically foreshadows quite a bit about the long kind of con, if you want to read it as that, of Yuhabak and Old Man Zangetsu. Um, yeah, again, Tension Tai is really cool. I really like the Tension Tai as this like thing that you can externalize this other spirit. I think the Bounce and their dolls were kind of playing off this idea, right, of an artificial kind of being that exists, and them controlling dolls that are sort of work kind of like the Tension Tai, I think. Not exactly, but like that, I think that gets picked up and run with in the doll bound arc, or whatever, the bound arc, which I'm not going to talk about because it's non-canon anime, whatever. But I will say that I really like the Tension Tai because it reminds me a lot of the Asauchi itself, and the Tension Tai being this pale white, just like the Hollow's mask, I think is evocative for me, especially because, of course, as we learn, the Asauchi are all like pale, sort of, they're all blank hollows that can be imprinted upon with their soul can take the form resonant with the Shinigamis, right? And so, in the same way, this seems like a sort of, I wouldn't be surprised if the Tenshintai itself like it has some connection to Hollows, right? Like because again, Hollows are the entity in this universe that manifest their power like physically. Like they're like the whole idea of like manifesting a soul is something that a Hollow does. um, a Soul Reaper resonates with that Hollow and allows it to manifest the blade differently, or even summon it forward and seize control of that power. But a Resurrection and a Bankai and Shikai, those release states are all hollow powers, right? Being able to kind of manifest and mutate with your Ryatsu, right? For your Ryatsu to make a physical sort of manifestation in that way is not strictly a hollow power, but is traditionally hollow. And so these tools that do that, I was about to say Ashigaru, the Zanpakuto and the Tenshintai, both of those essentially being tied to hollows would not surprise me. But I do like this. I think Tenshintai makes a lot of sense within that kind of architecture of, oh hey, we're kind of artificially using hollows, and I wouldn't be surprised if the Tenshintai was developed by Oetsu or a character like that. But yeah, I had misremembered. I thought that it was one of Urahara's inventions. Urahara definitely would be all about it because he's all about gaining power at huge risk. And I think actually, kind of interestingly, and why the Tenshintai doesn't really get mentioned again. Interestingly enough, both Renji, I don't think Renji really trains with the Tenshintai itself, but both Renji and Ichigo both train here, and both of them end up with a flawed Bankai, right? Both of them don't really understand the true nature of their Bankai. I think that's reflective of this kind of technique being flawed in a way. That the natural sort of mode of mastering one's Bankai is the way that you should probably go about it. And that both Renji and Ichigo kind of go about it the wrong way is, I think, captivating. The idea that these sort of shortcuts to power aren't as useful as you might think. Um, of course, yeah. To the idea that like externalizing the soul of Zanpakuto, that whole idea, and like the characters kind of losing their powers to a degree, and then having to kind of force them to submission. That plays out in the Zanpakuto Rebellion arc, which, yes, is anime only, uh, could be considered filler. That said, parts of it have already been adapted into like flashback that are in the Thousand Year Blood War anime, which is kind of interesting. Especially because Kubo supervised all those episodes, and Kubotai also supervised the development of that filler arc. He helped with all the design work for all the Zanpakuto spirits. He also, according to things that I had read, it was also evidently supposed to be a story arc that he wanted to write, but just didn't kind of have the space to with how Bleach ended up. Which makes a lot of sense. You want to write certain things into your story, but like your story can kind of get away from you, and once you end up down a path, maybe you don't actually get to breaking and getting to do the whole other story you wanted to kind of embed in there. Seems more and more a distraction than something that's feasible. Um, and so, yeah, it's interesting here that again, I love the flashback being inside of Ichigo's own shadow. That's great stuff. Obviously connecting to Yuhaba. Uh, you know, this idea of like piercing something and imbuing it with like this power or transferring this power to it is something that we saw in the very first chapter. So, and we would continue to see throughout Bleach this idea of like piercing something and then it being representative or it gaining a representation of that power is constantly sort of present throughout Bleach. Now, as far as why Old Man, Zengetsu appears here and not like White, right? Why we get that is, again, remember, Old Man Zangetsu is still an aspect of Zangetsu and is the dominant aspect right now, right? The idea is that White has been subsumed and made subservient to Old Man Zangetsu. And so, like, yes, Old Man Zangetsu is not representative of the whole of Ichigo's powers and is in fact kind of keeping Ichigo from really mastering his true power in a lot of ways. But he doesn't lie here. which is pretty great. Um, and we get to kind of what I'm talking about, this sort of this moment here, right, where all these swords erupt from the earth, which again is reminiscent of the Almighty in a way. If you do remember, the Almighty could like make traps kind of be where they wouldn't normally be, right? This materialization of all these swords, like, oh well, I've put us into a timeline where all these swords are there. I'm not saying that that's what's happening, but I think it's certainly reminiscent of use of the Almighty. I think this is just Zangetsu manifesting aspects of himself, right? But the all important line here, right, is that there's one of these swords that is the real Zangetsu, and that he can only be defeated by that sword. As we come to find out, the real Zangetsu is not any of these swords. The real Zangetsu is the pair of swords that Ichigo forges in the future. However, those pair of swords, while they work in tandem, whenever Ichigo swings his true Bankai at um, at Yuhabak, right? Those final kind of pages, like not the last chapter, but at the very final conflict there, all of the white kind of gets crumbled away, and there's just that original sort of Shikai looking blade, and he's able to kill Yuhabak with that. And again, the idea is that like people are like, oh, what does Ichigo's Bankai do? Like, what does his true Bankai do? What is its actual powers? We hardly get to see it, and I don't think that's fair. I think whenever Ichigo is in that fight, we do get to see a lot of new techniques from him. We get to see a lot of different things that he does, but notably, the power of his Zanpakuto is that it is the only sword that can defeat Yuhaba, as stated by a vestige of Yuhabak right here, right? So the idea is that the reason why it crumbles down to that one sword, why it becomes, this sort of original Shikai like shape, is it's because it is the sword from this battle. It is the only sword that can defeat, our final antagonist, right? And even this line of like, if you want me to submit, find it before I kill you, yet again is reflective of the kind of final conflict, right? If Ichigo wants Yuhabak to submit to him, he's going to have to strike him down with that sword before he's killed by Yuhabak, and that's what comes to pass. So I really do like that kind of that this is a true statement that's being made by Old Man Zangetsu. It is both true and false, right? Um, I think it is certainly the real reflection of Yuha itself. So like the real me, it's like it's not the real Zangetsu, but it's the real reflection of Yuha own power that can defeat him. Does that follow? Like if the white is Shiro, right, or Shirosaki or white, if those elements, right, those two elements in tandem kind of are working together, uh, and all of that, like if he coats the one sword in the other, whatever, uses them both together, whatever way you might want to interpret that. The whole point is that Old Man Zangetsu is saying that this aspect of himself that is to become the sword Zangetsu is ultimately what he will slay Yuhabak with. So, beginning of the death tomorrow, right? Yeah, it's I don't know, it's cool stuff. I really like one of my favorite things is that Kubo does have like all these little things that end up adding up, and you can say like, oh well, that's reading a little bit too much into it, or retroactively kind of going back through your own manga, picking up a bunch of things and then bringing them back later. Is that really like foreshadowing, or were you just saying like reutilizing things that you had written earlier, right? And I think that there's a little bit of all of that going on here, certainly, but it's also fun and it's enjoyable, and I like those elements of Bleach. I like that, like these kind of moments end up having a significance that's deeper than what we initially understand. Um, yeah, I also yeah, just cool visuals. The sort of like field of swords and them both clashing with various swords. Great stuff. Of course, Marina's got Sabimaru. He's ready to go. Momo is ready to go kill Hitsugaya, I guess. She stilled herself. Um, I do love like the juxtaposition between Kira, who is weighed down by his guilt. Haha, Wabisuke reference. Is essentially freed by Ichimaru again and taken in his hand, right? Uh, and yeah, it's cool stuff. It's all. It's all. It's all. It's cool. That's all I gotta say there. Ain't much else to say with that. We'll get to how those play out whenever they play out, but you know that about covers it. That's all I have for this volume. No, not this volume. This chapter. What am I saying? But this has been chapter 127, the beginning of the Death of Tomorrow, which is it's a cool chapter. It has a lot of stuff that's immediately going to lead into the next part of the story, but also a lot of stuff that like will pay off dividends in the long run, in a lot of different ways, which I think is really cool. Of course, if you got to the end of this, thank you. Thank you for watching this whole thing. If you watched the whole video, if you enjoyed this video, please do give it a like. I really do appreciate the likes that you give, the knowledge that, hey, there are people that care to listen to this whole thing other than myself. I always listen back to these because I like to know my own thoughts. It's weird. Like this is as much like for me as it is anyone else. Um, but yeah, I hope you enjoyed this. And if you'd like to see more of it, you can always subscribe to the channel. I try to get an episode of these up every day of the week. But the other big thing that you can do if you want to bring your support one step further, another way that you can support the channel is always, of course, through the Patreon. The link is in the description for the video. But if you could support me on the Patreon for as little as $1, you can help to make this channel greater than it already is. Woohoo! But also, big thing is that I'll give you big shout outs. You get to be in every video. Um, and yeah, Patreon folks, I appreciate it. Thank you. But yeah, that's all I got to say for this one. If there's anything that you want to add, if there's anything that you think is pertinent, feel free to let me know in the comments below. But been it for me, Carker Gold, signing out on this one with the usual reminder that spirits are forever with you. Stay gold.